Welcome to the first ever episode of APIs You Won't Hate, a podcast started by three dudes in an API channel who we love to bitch and moan about other people's APIs and try and help other people learn how to build better APIs. My name is Matt, and more importantly, I'm joined by two really awesome dudes, Mike and Phil. Mike, you want to introduce yourself real fast?
Yeah, sure. My name is Mike Bifulco. I am an American East Coaster. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm a primarily user experience and software design guy. I kind of tend to live more on the front end of things, and as a result of that, tend to be more of the consumer of and user of and person who gets to deal with the APIs created by other people. But I think that puts me in a place where my perspective is varied enough from you guys that I'll be yelling about different things than the two of you.
Sweet, that's awesome. How did you get involved with, or I guess I should ask, how did you get involved with Phil Sturgeon's life?
Well, I think it was probably from Twitter. I had probably responded to a couple of Phil's tweets over time, and had read one or two of his books prior. And we started talking one way or another because of his work on a current book, and he was looking for someone who was more design oriented to collaborate with. So I dropped him a line, and we talked a bit. I guess that was probably late last year, and before long had sort of agreed on a plan to co-author a book together. And that's the rest is kind of history. That was probably good 6 or 8 months ago now.
Yeah, I think it was like back in August we started chatting. I think most of the conversation was about bikes and then a little bit about APIs.
That sounds about right.
Bit of a pattern with my friends. I don't know.
And then Phil, I think most people probably know who you are, but for the people who don't, or people who think you're probably dead somewhere, how's it feel being alive?
Yeah. I guess folks might know me from APIs You Won't Hate, the book and the website and stuff. My name's Phil Sturgeon. I have been blogging and shouting and banging on about various different things rather loudly and publicly for quite a long time. Used to do a whole bunch of PHP work and was involved with a whole bunch of frameworks, things like that. Good old coding letter days. Whoop, whoop. And I think this is my fifth podcast now. I was living in the States. Now I live on a bike. I had a fantastic experience just downstairs. When I was checking into the hotel, the guy was like, can you put your address on the form? And I was like, oh no, I don't actually have an address. I live on my bike. And he just started rolling his eyes. And I'm like, actually, that reminds me, I've got some stuff being shipped to the hotel. And he started rolling his eyes even more. And there was an American lady stood next to me. And she went, oh, that's so exciting. How long are you going to be riding around for? And I said, oh, until they impeach Trump. And then she rolled her eyes, and I'm just everyone around me upset.
Perfect response.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So that's me. Yeah.
So Mike, you also bike as well. Probably not on the same level as Phil, but what kind of biking stuff to get into? I mean, because really, we all talk about APIs, we all bitch about APIs, but I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you ask any one of us what we really love to do, it's be on a bike.
Yeah, so I mostly do road cycling, and I guess you would call it light touring and distance riding around town. I have a couple of different bikes for the most part. I tend to stick around Charlotte at the current time, but I've been doing it for probably about 6 years now, and mostly ride alone. I do a lot of riding on Zwift these days because my work life is so hectic. It's difficult to get a few hours to escape and actually go outside, but a lot of my riding stems from my need to get away from a computer and spend some time out in nature, ideally, but at worst, with my headphones on at home, shouting at myself while I try and beat my numbers from last time.
Nice. And Phil, I mean, what do you do when you're not on a bike? I think that's the real question people want to know.
No, there isn't that. It's basically bike and then work. Because I am currently doing a big old Europe bike trip thing. I ride a bike for 4 hours a day trying to get to the next place. And then it's just immediately work. If it's not one of those two things, I like hiking and camping and stuff. I like just being in nature away from a bike when you can actually kind of enjoy it instead of hurtling past it at 20 miles an hour and trying to not hit into a tree. My state slower, you know.
Yeah, fair enough. How many miles are under your belt on your current tour?
Oh, I have some stats right here. So I've
nice.
been riding around since I left I left America the end of January, and I was kind of riding around in circles for a while. But since in the last 2 months, I have done damn it, I lost it. 2,500 miles, I think.
Jeez.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been pretty good fun.
Yeah, I'll say that's.
I mean,
Yeah, here we go. So 2,500 miles, 23 and a half miles of elevation, 180 hours, which is 180 hours, which is 0.14 dog years. Um, nine countries, 2 vacation days, 1 sick day, and my maximum croissants per day was 7. So it's been a pretty good couple of months.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. That's more miles than I covered last year, for context.
Yeah,
that's just under like my entire lifetime mileage, just to put that out there.
Yeah, I've definitely ramped it up a little bit recently. But if anyone's interested in that, there's Filled Up Bike. But this is APIsYouWon'tHate.com, the podcast.
Yep.
So,
so I was going to bring it up because you started your European tour after you got kicked out of the country in Tenerife, I think is how you say it, and then you ended up in Poland, and that's because you started at Stoplight, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, for people who don't know, like, what is Stoplight? What are y'all doing there?
Stoplight build API design tooling. It's one of those comical things. Like inside the API world, it seems like everyone knows who Stoplight is, and they're like, "Whoa!" And then you kind of go outside of the API world, and they're less known. So I'm definitely kind of learning that I have to explain it to people. But API design tooling is stuff like working with API specifications, Open API, JSON schema, and the awkward combination of both sometimes. And nobody really enjoys writing a bunch of YAML files by hand. Like whenever you talk to people about Open API or API specifications in general, they're like, "Oh, I don't do any of that. I don't want to write YAML files by hand, or I don't want to have one giant YAML file which is 5,000 lines long." I'm like, "Oh, it bloody well shouldn't be 5,000 lines long. You should have something that handles refs for you and everything else." So we've got a really cool GUI editor, which I just spammed out some links to some people today. The day we're recording, June 7th. So yeah, early access has gone out to a couple of people, and hopefully more people will get it soon. But it's a GUI where you just get like wizard views and interactive forms to work with really complex things. So instead of just a couple of hardcore API specification fans at the company saying like, "Hey, you should totally do this thing," everyone can use it. So you don't. You can give this tool to beginners and they can build API specs that you can then use for mocking, and it's got style guides built in so you can get feedback and you can use it for your contract testing and all that cool stuff you can do with specs. Now beginners can do it too because it's not really complicated to work with.
Yeah, you sent that to me, I think about maybe 2 hours ago, and I just opened it up right before we got on here, and I have to say, this thing looks really freaking cool. I'm utterly excited to get started playing with it. But since it's our first episode, I think we can spam pretty much all of our projects. You and I also collaborated on a few different projects, one of them being OpenAPI.tools. What was your inspiration behind conning me into buying a domain and setting it up, and what do you kind of hope it turns into like a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road?
Yeah, so OpenAPI tools was a funny one because when you're trying to find tooling to work with OpenAPI stuff, a lot of it's quite hard to find. There's one big old maintained list by OpenAPI, openapis.org, like the official website, have a list of tools on their GitHub repo and stuff, but it's not the most inclusive. There's quite a lot of old stuff on there, and it's not very opinionated. Something that people say about me, lots of opinions, don't mind sharing them. Like if I think a tool is a piece of crap, then I don't put it on openapi.tools. And that's I can do that because it's not the official list. So the idea is that we have one place where there's good quality tools. We can mark whether they work with OpenAPI 2 or 3 to help people and kind of shepherd people towards the good ones so they get more attention and get better over time. Because when people are just Googling for things and they don't find it because it's called Swagger instead of OpenAPI and they can't find the tool they're looking for, they just go and build their own. And then we have like 10 different versions of the same tool that are all kind of a bit rubbish because everyone's desperately trying to work on them in their free time. Whereas if we can like funnel people towards some already existing good implementations, then hopefully they can send in bug reports and send in pull requests and make that smaller number better over time. It's kind of the plan anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed working on it. It's exposed me to a lot of different tools, and it's kind of giving me new ideas, new things to play with, and also just meeting really cool people like Daryl, Mike, other Mike, both Mikes. I shouldn't say other Mike because you're just as cool, but Mike Ralston, Mike Bifulco, pretty much everyone out there. And so you guys, you both mentioned you're working on a book together too. How's that going, and when can we expect to see it?
Yeah, so it's in flight right now. It's been, I think Phil's probably been working on it for close to a year and a half, if I had to guess, something like that, based on kind of when I got involved. We are, I think, 70% through is a fair characterization of where it's at. And you can actually go and chase it down now on LeanPub. And you'll get a draft of the book in the state that it's currently in and get updates as we submit changes to it. But our goal for a published date is the beginning of July, and then we'll probably work out a few kinks between then and the next few months and figure out where we can improve on any errors that are in there or add or whatever, fill in the blanks if there's any details based on folks' feedback, and then we'll go to print shortly after that.
And so, Phil, like, how's it been writing this book versus your first book?
Yeah, it's been tricky. A lot of the trouble there's been two troubles. Trying to write two books at the same time is potentially a little bit silly. So one of the books, Surviving. I'll remember how to use words at some point. It's because I haven't been speaking English to anyone in multiple days. Mike and I are working on surviving other people's APIs. The point of that book is it's all about the other side of the coin, right? Like the original book, Build APIs You Won't Hate, is building APIs and how to try and make the best API for you, for your situation that you can. And there's not a huge amount of point in making like the best API in the world if like people can't talk to it. And a problem that I've run into a lot is that a lot of not to diminish front-end developers at all, but they don't necessarily know how to talk to the API in certain ways. Like there are things that the back-end developers that are doing that aren't being communicated to the front-end developer, and there's just a disconnect between those two parties. So trying to create a book to kind of fill in those gaps is what this book's all about. And it's been tricky for me because obviously I am very, very back-end. Like my front-end experience was 2 months of me learning React and getting very angry about it, and then like a 10-year gap and jQuery, I guess. I'm really not a front-end developer. So being not a front-end developer and then writing a book, which is not just for front-end developers, but people that are talking to APIs. So that is a lot of front-end stuff. Was a bit tricky, and that's why I got that's why I got Mike involved. Because his full stack experience and knowledge of front end stuff helps round out the book. A lot of what my job has been for the longest time is to be like an ambassador between different parties. So often the back end people will want to do one thing, and then the front end people will have other requirements, and then it's just a fight between the two. And quite often I like deal with resolving those situations in a way that hopefully pleases both sides or makes them both equally as pissed off, whichever. But it's been helpful, but it's kind of tricky to keep that context. Like when I'm writing the book, I keep starting to write a chapter and it's meant to be aimed at clients, and then I start like veering off into back-end developer speech and I completely forget what I'm doing, and I have to like scratch 10 paragraphs and start again. So yeah, that's been a bit of a pain in the butt, but it's getting there. Like 70%. I just wrote another half a chapter like over the last 2 days, so we're getting there.
And I think
Nice.
I have a bit of a complementary skill set in the sense that in the same way that Phil is sort of the ambassador between front end and back end ish, my experience as a designer as well as a front end developer is generally being the ambassador between the people building the way the thing looks and the people using the thing. And I think that's where a lot of my experience is helpful for writing the book. So a lot of the things you don't consider when you're working with an API is the things that what to do when it goes wrong, or how best to present the interim states while you're waiting for feedback from an API, and how to do all the things that psychologically make sense for the people using the application, how to convey those, how to create patterns around them so that they're consistent throughout the application experience. That's stuff that I do every day and have been doing for years and years. And I think because of the fact, too, that I live on the other side of the fence from Phil, where I've been writing in React for a few years now and yelling about how sad I am about jQuery and haven't honestly been touching the API side of things nearly as much, has made me kind of a good fit to write about the other side of things that Phil was looking for with the book here.
So to go down that, I mean, since you are front end and not really doing a lot with the back end, like what is, without naming and shaming, I don't think we're there on the podcast just yet, but like what is like the worst thing you've seen as a front end developer trying to interact with an API?
Yeah. So it's funny. I always talk about design being one of those things where going to design school and reading about this stuff and learning about this stuff and starting to focus on it really ruins a lot for you. And so it's a lot of the stuff that bothers me the most may not even be things that I've had to deal with using APIs or even for teams that I've worked on directly. But you start to run into patterns and things that just don't make sense and are like really, really frustrating to deal with. And I think along those lines, my absolute favorite anecdote, I guess, is having to do with when a application is built and the API fails and doesn't do so gracefully. So the most common example of this is on actually, I probably shouldn't name names here, but a particular app that I use on my phone quite a bit. I've noticed that if I have a flaky Wi-Fi connection, rather than showing me that I have a bad connection or giving me an error that shows that something is wrong, it's a fitness-related application, and it will look like it has absolutely wiped out all of my history in the 10 plus years I've been using this thing, and that is a really, really scary thing to see. Like, it doesn't look like there's nothing on the screen. It looks like, oh, hey, this is your first activity. Hit the plus button to start a new activity, as opposed to like, oh, here's your 900 things you've recorded over the past 10 years. Give us a minute while we load them. Like, those two things are fundamentally very different, and one of which is, okay, I can be patient and wait for it to load, and the other is, holy crap, all my stuff is gone and I'm mad and upset and confused. And I think things like that are so easy to get around if you just spend a little bit of time thinking about it, and honestly a little bit of time just testing the thing. But oftentimes that doesn't go tested, because that doesn't, like, if you think about it, if you've built software, something like that doesn't usually end up on a storyboard in a sprint. Like people don't spend a lot of time thinking about the edge cases where it's kind of working and kind of not working, and that's really where you start to win over user experience.
It makes a lot of sense, and I feel like that's somethend that, as backend developers, we never really totally feel like, because there really isn't like a design course for writing backend code. It's, does it work? Yes. Does it make sense? Yes. Ship it, test it. Sometimes not even test it. It's one of those things that you just kind of YOLO with. But on the flip side, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say that just kind of lives in a place where, like, that specific scenario, all of the tests that you could write for backend stuff could work perfectly, right? Like, you might know to wait for the call to come back and have the context around, like, yeah, we're pulling down a megabyte of information over a 3G connection. It's going to take a while. And that's perfectly fine, and will pass testing and pass muster and all the other things. And it's just something that isn't super obvious if you haven't thought about testing it even from the front end, particularly when your development team is sitting, on a fiber optic connection 3 feet from the test server, or from the cloud connection to whatever web services are being used. It's very easy to forget about that stuff, and it makes all the difference. It's the difference between polish and something that's like just acceptable.
I feel like Phil has a blog post describing that exact same problem that he faced at a company quite some time ago. Like either that or it was a talk. It was something. I don't want to name the company's dead, but I won't name them. But you talked about how
Mega Ringclude of Doom.
pretty much, yeah. Like you're including all of the data on like a basic get call, and it was just crashing the client app.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This happens all the time. It's one of them was quite funny. My previous employer, there was a situation that this was more an API design problem. So some of these, that's why I was kind of doing both books at the same time, right? Because every single day there's like 5 different fires, and I just write down notes and go like, oh, that was a client mistake, that'll go in this book. Oh, that was a server mistake, that'll go in this book. I'm just like piling all these huge notes up, waiting for the day where I actually have the time to maybe write up those notes. But then there were so many more fires making so many more notes, it never happened. But yeah, on the server side, people do things like they create a resource which then includes some items from another resource and some items from another resource. There was if you look at the company profile for this co-working space, then it includes all of the users and members for that company, and it includes all of the buildings and locations that they're in. And that was completely fine when the API was designed, because people assumed that companies would never have more than 50 members. 50 is a huge number. We deal with these small little startups. There's going to be like 9. And then, they're only going to have 1 or 2 buildings because there's only going to be 9 people. Why would they have, loads of buildings? And then Amazon and Facebook moved in. And Amazon and Facebook each had like 8,000 employees or members. And that meant that if you were to go to the company directory and view the Amazon or Facebook profiles, it would crash the entire API, which would also crash every single application in the entire company, because obviously this central API was a monolith for everything required. So just literally people requiring too much data on the API side can crash your entire billion-dollar company. And that's annoying. You could fix that with a bit of pagination or whatever, right? Or just not including too many things. And then clients run around including too many things themselves. And so even if they switch to using something like JSON API, right, where you just have the one resource that you're looking at, and then you give them the option to include more things, that's giving the client a lot of rope to hang you with, because they end up asking for way too many things. There's this whole, HTTP 1.1 mindset where number of requests must be as low as possible. And it's kind of like when you first learn about SQL optimization, when you first learn that making too many SQL requests is bad, you immediately want to just make one SQL request to have everything in this giant join. And that's actually way less performant than having, a few targeted things. Don't have 100 SQL calls. Don't have 1, have like 6 or whatever. You got to benchmark this stuff. So API clients do this all the time, where they just try and batch everything into one giant GET request, and it crashes the server, or it just takes a really long time. Or you have a problem where you're requesting information A, B, and C. A is what you really care about, but you've just bunged B and C in there anyway, and they might be below the fold, and it doesn't really matter. Like a feed with some suggestions next to it or whatever. You can't show that feed until the server has finished preparing all of that JSON, all of that batch, all comes down the pipe together at the same time, and it all gets to the browser at the same time, and then you can start to show data. So because you've asked for a whole bunch of things, you can't show the important thing until some unimportant stuff has turned up. And things like that, what we're trying to talk about in this book. I mean, batching sucks, and it's the core premise of.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's all. I mean, that's great stuff for future episodes. I think that gives us material for 5 or 6 episodes at least. So we're at least going to be here for 5 or 6 episodes. It sounds like. But to take a quick pivot, like Phil, you also started the APIs You Wont Hate Slack channel, which is kind of where we've all been formulating all these crazy ideas that we have. I shouldn't say just you. It's all of us together to kind of grow our little community up and kind of offer some resources to people who want to learn how to build APIs better, or just learn better design, better tips, or anything like that. And one thing you've really brought out to us is mentoring. and you kind of have like a different spin on just your average mentoring. What is your idea behind it, and what are you hoping to accomplish there?
Yeah, the mentoring thing's been interesting. It's basically an attempt at helping folks that often don't get as much help as they should. So the API community, just like a lot of communities in tech, is very much like one specific demographic. Like it's a whole bunch of white dudes a lot of the time, definitely a whole bunch of dudes. And so the idea of the mentorship is to kind of just try and balance that a little bit. We tweeted out, and we've been kind of just reaching out to people in general, just offering mentorship. I'm just saying, if you're not a white dude and would like to, come talk to us, we'll pair you up with somebody who's in roughly the right time zone. And that's actually been the biggest barrier so far. Like a whole bunch of people wanted to have somebody to talk APIs with one-on-one. But a lot of the time zones are a bit off. Like there's people in America offering and people in Africa who want the help. And so that time zone can be a bit of trouble. But we've got a few Europeans and a few Australians that are balancing things out. So if people would like to join our Slack channel looking to be a mentor or looking to be a mentoree, can definitely pair you up with somebody. Just come in at Phil Sturgeon or jump in there. I think there's a mentoring channel. Oh, that's a private one. Yeah, so just at Phil Sturgeon. And it honestly doesn't really take that much time. Like people just want to be able to ask questions somewhere where they're not going to get shouted at. And there's like no silly questions, and you can come talk to us, and it can be about APIs and it can be about other stuff. But yeah, it's just, I think a lot of people just want to have someone that they can ask any questions to that's not going to end up in like people screaming at each other on Reddit,
Yeah, I mean, Reddit's the worst anyways. No one really wants to be screamed at. Is like, if someone wanted to be a mentor to someone else, like, is there an avenue for them to kind of get involved as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Just come talk to me on anywhere. If you have questions about it, come ask anywhere, and then I'll send you to the Slack channel at some point. You don't need to be an expert, whatever that means. We have a whole bunch of people that are very, very junior developers, and they maybe have been focusing on front end and want to learn some back end, or maybe they're full stack and want to kind of, round out some specific API bits or whatever it is. But most of it's not like, what's the difference between JSON LD and JSON API, and when should I use which, or these really obscure things. It's usually just like, what's patch all about, and so a lot of it's just teaching people how to Google things and like how to find out where they can learn about these things and stuff. But it's not a huge time commitment at all so far.
I mean, really, that begs the question: does anyone really know what patch does?
Are you asking? I have a blog post on it.
I know. I mean, honestly, if I have to Google anything APIs, I just put your name on my Google search at this point, because I know pretty much you've written about APIs from start to finish, everywhere in between. It's almost kind of amazing how much is out there that is your name based and not somebody else, and how I just know it's like, well, Phil wrote it, I can trust it because it's been battle tested and vetted and all that good stuff.
It's all a really long con for Phil to fit in some misinformation every 43 posts.
That's the plan.
Long con to get Phil, to pay for Phil to bike across the world and not have to work.
Yeah, right. Right.
It's basically it. Just got to get the 2 books out. No, I mean, there's a bunch of really good information out there. It's just hard to read and hard to digest sometimes. My inbox these days is just constantly flooded with white papers about stuff, and you just kind of read through it and you're like, what does this mean? And it's just and then eventually I kind of digest it all down and spend a week trying to figure out what they were talking about. I'm like, oh, that's a great idea, and turn it into 1,000-word blog post, and then people are like, oh, cool, I like that. But it's just different audiences, right? There's some people don't know what the hell half the words mean in the thing. You got to convert that.
Right. Yeah, I mean that all makes sense. I mean, I think the only person I know who actually enjoys reading white papers, I think, is Ben Ramsey. And he openly admits to loving reading these things. And I'm like, This is the most boring thing I've ever done in my entire life. But I think, yeah, I think that gives us a great start to hopefully a long-running series of podcasting that eventually will get our good friend Ben Edmonds on as like a PHP round or a town hall reunion at some point. But is there any last things that we want to leave off on for this episode? Anything you want to tease for next time or?
Yeah, I think it'd be great to, if anyone listening has an idea of things they want to hear us wax philosophical about, feedback is always a good thing. So shout at us on Twitter, or if you're on the Slack in the Slack team, any of those places are good for feedback or ideas.
And so since you just mentioned Twitter, Mike, if anyone wants to, especially for front-end design questions, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, good point. I guess I didn't say that before. So my Twitter is Irreverent Mike, IRREVERENT Mike. And just about everywhere else I can be found under my name, Mike Bifulco, Bifulco. You can find me on GitHub if you want to see how capable or incapable I am too. I kind of tend to do it all out in the open. I also stream on Twitch once a week. My work for Gymnasium, the code school I work for, every Tuesday afternoon Eastern Standard Time from 1:30 to 3, I stream at Twitch/Irreverent Mike.
Nice. Hopefully, I mean, I think it'd be cool if we could find a way to like stream API development. Maybe like Phil or I sitting down and like us all three working on like an app, probably a bike app. I mean,
yeah,
I don't really know what else. Maybe a hot chicken app. I think Phil, you've had hot chicken. You know how great it is.
I'd love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Phil, I mean, I think everyone knows your Twitter handle, but just in case no one does, where can we find you on the internet?
Yeah, I am Phil Sturgeon on all the places. I'm very unimaginative. There aren't many other Phil Sturgeons around, so I stole them all. And there's one other Phil Sturgeon in Bristol, and I'm sure he hates me.
Wait, have you ever met him?
No, but a lot of people thought I was him. So like when I was 20, there was some 40-year-old Phil Sturgeon who worked in IT in the same city as me. And then I go to a bunch of conferences and people are like, we thought you were 40 and bold.
I'll be there one day.
Surprise. Yeah, all right, getting there. So yeah, Phil Sturgeon on Twitter, and something that we did recently, actually, we switched the blog from Medium to actually on the website. That was some fantastic work by Mike. And so if you're interested in getting articles that we're writing, I think we actually have a feed now. Did that get merged? The
yes,
old RSS feed there? Mm-hmm. Yay! So heading over to the blog and give us a follow on there, because we're trying to get away from that whole Medium thing. So yeah, check out them blog articles, and that is all the stuff from me.
Cool.
Matt, how do people find you?
Yeah, well, I'm currently on a Twitter break, and it's been doing wonders for my mental health. But you can find me on Twitter at Matthew Trask, MatthewTrask. It's the same thing as GitHub. And you can also find me roaming around the APIs You Won't Hate Slack. So you're more than welcome to always message me, ask me questions. If I don't know, I'll just send you to Phil, or I'll ask Phil so I can learn too. But either way, my inboxes are always open. So that, Mike, Phil, excuse me. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. Phil, I know it's like 2 o'clock in the morning and you got some biking to do, so I'll let you get going, and we will catch everyone next time.
Awesome.
Thanks, man.